rather large start-stop. Okay, if anybody would like to deal with the camera, you're more than welcome to. So this is it. I think Luke may be joining us, may not. Jacqueline, Barnaby, Sarah, Mattia have sent their apologies. Most of them are ill. In Jacqueline's case, she's working on something that she couldn't get out of, et cetera, et cetera. So I might have missed people. I'm sure I've missed people. Grace. Oh yeah, Grace is away. That's why. This is Grace. Hello, Grace. Okay, so I have to unfortunately sit on my other chair because my back is really bad. Okay. So we do have an MA student who's parachuted in. I just want to make sure and ask the group. I know that you're here, Dean, so you know it'd be kind of odd. But are you all right with him being here as an MA student? Yeah. Okay, good. Good. Okay. What we're doing, I'm just going to then summarize certain aspects. So, but you will probably be a little bit lost.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay. Dane, why don't you actually, in fact, why don't we just introduce ourselves very briefly so everybody knows who's who. Maybe we can start with Lauren, and then we'll just go around. You're missing like 6 other people here, so, but that's all right.
Speak up, Lauren. Speak up.
Sorry. Yes, I'm Lauren, and I'm interested in, well, I haven't got my blurb ready today. I mean, I've been writing my blurb for the
That's right, just tell them who you are. That's
okay,
fine.
yeah, I'm Lauren.
And you're doing a PhD.
Yes,
And it's connected with?
Well, I was thinking I might tell you about the structure today because I haven't got it into its 3 parts, which you were saying, like, not that it has to be 3 parts, but I just noticed that it's sort of sitting in 2 parts, and with the second part kind of dividing into 2. And so, like, the first part is dealing with the imminence, desire, and event, sort of setting that out, and then the second part is kind of expression and repression of event. But that really is going to be kind of a thematic which I approached 2 other aspects through that. But anyway, that's probably enough.
Right, so and it has to do with a thing called Event Zero you're talking about,
yes.
Which is dealing with space and time and...
Yeah, well, difference, but in more to do with getting, addressing the notion of an event rather than sort of like identity and difference still in the dialectics. So the non-dialectical event, and then linking up with sciences, contemporary sciences, genesis of. Oh, actually, in terms of my keywords, Mike, I took 2 hours working out.
That's right, you don't have to do keywords. This is okay. No, that doesn't matter. If they're not on top of your head, that's okay. That's okay. So this is Lauren. Okay. Thank you, Lauren.
Dr. Mark Walker. I'm here as your guest, I think.
Postdoc.
Postdoc, yeah. I'm here. I'm always here. Does that work? No.
Actually, I just want you to know that these are my students from many years, and they're much more articulate. So you can come up with. What have you done?
What have I done?
No, just introduce yourself to Dane.
Yeah, my thesis, I did my doctoral thesis on the philosophy of Theodore Adorno. It was entitled Experiential Embodiment, Human Immediacy and Adorno's Negative Affinity. That was in 2008, I believe. Since then, the process has continued. We just study, we just create, we just study some more, we create, we travel. I come up from Kent, which is why I show you how keen I am to come here. From Kent, 2 hours in Birmingham, and then back to Kent. So yeah, I think that's showing commitment, a high level of commitment, and application. I'm interested in the travail, found objects maybe. I had a little band, we got to practice coming up on Saturday. What else are we doing?
That's good. Okay.
Okay, I'm Dane. I work with ideas of parallel working between hardware and software.
Sorry, hold on. I'm in the seminar right now. Can you call back? Oh, okay. Michaela, call me back. Thanks. Bye. 2 hours. Yeah, thanks. Okay. Hold on.
And sort of how the ideas of hardware and software play into analogy and logical reasoning in consciousness. And I try to work sort of interdisciplinary, sort of look at it from scientific perspectives, mathematical art, and how sort of when I create work, how it sort of feeds on the ideas of a hard material, as that hard material edge and that sort of more virtual edge, and sort of the interfaces and how you sort of interact with them.
Great. Thanks.
I'm Lisa. I've got 1 more year part-time PhD. I'm a practicing artist when I can, when the writing doesn't get in the way, which it does quite a lot. And I'm interested in a kind of disco aesthetic, to kind of create installations that disorientate the viewer, so these encounters where the viewer can't quite place themselves, position themselves, and I'm kind of drawing on a mixture of kind of queer theory, which operates more in the realm of the social, and phenomenology, which kind of supposedly operates more in the realm of an embodied, the feeling stuff, and the kind of relation between the two and the trouble between the two.
Who would you say are your primary interlocutors that you're dealing with?
Sarah Ahmed, who's written Queer Phenomenology, kind of bringing them together, but then I'm trying to kind of work an idea of disorientation that stretches it from where she's at, really. So Merleau-Ponty is the other one there. And then the kind of more recent writings on queer theory, such as the Claire Colebrook stuff on the Radical Open. I just got a book at the library on Kant and the orientation of thought, to think about orientations and disorientations in theory as well as in art.
And which book is that?
I've just got it for his, because I think one of the things I like about Merleau-Ponty is the kind of crazy experiments that are involved in it. So like you'll have, I don't know, someone with strange glasses that will make the world turn 90 degrees, and how you kind of inhabit that world and how it takes a while to inhabit that world. And there's also experiments in Kant that are about the orientating yourself in relation to the walls and the doors and the verticals and horizontals of the world. I'm just trying to just look at that bit and pretend nothing else exists around Kant.
Great. Great. Yes, I just isolate Kant.
Yes.
I'm Gianpaolo. We know each other from the MA, and I've sort of started the PhD, but I haven't formulated a proper question, so I kind of have a vague sense of the territory that I'm interested in, and possibly where I'd like to go. And at the moment, I've got an introduction to some books, and I'm just sensing what my kind of experience of reading some of this material is. And so at the moment, I'm actually trying to find the type of writers and the type of language that probably best, that I feel I can work with, rather than, well, this is something I've been thinking about, whether actually I need to have the depth of knowledge as a sort of background in things that I don't actually fully relate to as modes of thinking. So, which would be even the introduction and perhaps Lyotard. So, ultimately, well, where I see myself going is where I hope to go, where I would like to go is looking at perception and modes of thinking, but in relation to things like heat, so the kind of thinking in different kinds of environments, for example.
Interesting. Okay.
You know which one.
That's right. But maybe you could just say what you're thinking about in terms of your work.
Actually, I'm just sitting. Hopefully, I start.
That's it. Okay.
I know
Okay.
your work is fine.
Okay, that's great. So we're going to just have, what I want to do now, because as the PhD seminar, let's say, gels, it would be great if most of you, in fact, all of you, could come consistently. Obviously, Mark's coming, you know, that's important. So here's my question. Is it better for consistency if we had it every 2 weeks? Or would it be, which would be more doable? Because I think that one of the reasons that we have 6 people missing is because the weekly thing might be just too hard to do. And I mean, I know that 3 or 4 of them are ill, but still, I'm just wondering, would that?
I don't think so.
No.
I think 2 weeks is too long.
Okay.
I
No.
disagree.
Okay, fair enough. Yeah, I also think that it wouldn't solve the disappearance of the others as such. That's fine, but I disagree.
I disagree. I mean, partly because I'm part-time and also because I've used up all my babysitting favours
Oh,
for
right.
the last 3 weeks.
Uh-huh.
Next week's half term, so I'm not going to be able to make that anyway.
Right.
2 weeks would really work for me to enable me to do the readings as well as to attend.
Yeah. What about other people?
It feels better, but in actual, the problem for me is work.
Right.
And so there's always going to be times where I can't say no to certain
Yes.
jobs, because if I take days out, I might lose the whole job, because I work as a technician in galleries. So,
Yeah.
so it's about trying to attend as often as possible, and
Okay.
limiting that damage, really.
Okay. It might be that we can come up with a situation where we do 3 weeks on and 1 week off. That's also a possibility. The reason I'm saying this is also because I have noticed that it is kind of like I didn't like the fact that I had to push this back 45 minutes, and that was because different meetings happen. It's like you guys, and suddenly you're forced to this, and I do apologize about that because I think that's just wrong. But I just couldn't shift it. So I'm just thinking that there might be times when, if I know that it's 3 weeks in a row and a break. But for the time being, we'll just go every week. And also that this will be live streamed eventually, as in like this week. So we'll just...
Will there be an archive in that?
Yes.
Yeah.
So, and I'm hoping with the live streaming that it will be interactive. So if, let's say, you're not able to come because you're located elsewhere, and it's not going to be too dementing to be, with children running around, that kind of thing, to actually be able to participate. I'm going to try to do that with Hannah as well. So we have people that can come into the...
That would be something that would work for me for the first 2 hours
until
school run.
Yeah. But at least it might be a way in.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So I would like to also suggest or remind you that on the 24th, which is a Wednesday, of this month, is a thing happening at the Trove, which is on thrill and sort of the relation, is pretty much imagining the future from the perspective of the virtual futures artists and philosophers. So we were hoping Stellar could make it, but he can't, unfortunately. But it's that group of people. So there's going to be Rachel Armstrong, who does work with body parts and augmented reality, and I think Dan O'Hara will be speaking on J.G. Ballard and his relationship to future worlds, but in a not literary, he's not going to do it in a literary sort of way. And there's 2 others whose names I've repressed, and that will be probably from 6 to 8 at the Trove. But there will be Luke, if he makes it here, will let you know in particular what it's about. And then on the 27th of November is the What Are series of simple questions on the question of what is a photograph. That's on a Tuesday, and that'll be our Tuesday. It'll start early, so if you can get here early, that'd be great. But it's it's going to be a closed session, but you're part of the closed session. Anybody who's doing the PhD seminar is part of that. What our series of simple questions.
So we don't need to sign up for that?
No, I'll just, just let me know if you're not able to do it.
What time is it?
It'll be all day. It'll start like at 10 and it'll go till 6. And there'll be about 30 people in a closed session in the canteen.
So this
So this
seminar
moment,
won't be happening.
This won't be happening because
Yeah.
that will be happening. And we're having people from all over the place coming in and discussing this, what is a photograph thing. And then on the, let's see, on the 8th of March is the other one, but that's in London on what's sense and sensibility in digital world. And I'll tell you more about that later. Okay.
Is there a representation one as well?
That's what the first one is. Oh, then the conference, the big conference is at the end of May. And either it's on the 25th to the 26th, or it's on the 27th to the 28th. I have to look at the schedule again. I'm not sure which days it's on. And that's here. And we're trying to get Barbara Bolt as the keynote, just so you know. She's already said yes, but we're just trying to figure out literally her timing on that. Okay. Oh, Daniel Rubenstein also is ill. That's another person who couldn't make it. Okay. And reminded me because she's going to be dealing with his thesis. Okay. Are we ready to begin? Last week, as you may remember, we really were trying to get at the issue of measurement. But measurement at the level of thickness and thin. So what is a thick concept? What is a thin concept? What does it mean to have opaque? What are these kind of entities dealing with when we're talking about the discourse figure? And this moved forward. I mean, this was not the only thing we were discussing, but it was kind of a jumping off point around which Lyotard is trying to develop, at least in the very first bits, this relationship between how something can be both thick and thin simultaneously, and also neither. And that whether or not that's the case, in whichever case we're talking about, I'll put more meat on the bones in a minute. What becomes at least clear for John Mowat, who wrote the introduction to the book, and Lyotard, who's trying to play around with these questions, is that the dialectical path is not helping to come to terms with that way of dealing with the questions. And that's kind of where we were circling for a lot of the time on that. So I just wanted to know, does anybody have any response to that from the last time? Because otherwise we'll just delve into it. I'm going to have to, can I borrow your book for a second? Yeah. I don't know what's happened to my book. I've loaned it out and it's gone away. Everybody looks around. There's the book. It's gone. Anyway, so actually, do people remember what we talked about last week? Because this problem with having 2 weeks is always hard. Mark, can you summarize it a little bit?
I think we discussed things, elements within language, different signifying regimes, the difference between signification and meaning.
I didn't notice that.
Actually, I was picking up something you said in the coffee shop. What's the difference between signification and meaning? I think there's signifying regimes, but that's not necessarily the meaning of something. I think that's what that is. I think meaning is the distance between things. I think it's like expression. That's the kind of thickness, but it may not be expoundable, but there's a certain spatiality to it.
To what?
To language, which isn't not necessarily a spatiality in the sense. I think I mentioned a bit earlier in another one of these sessions about the Heideggerian idea of distance, which isn't spatial distance, where it's that kind of physical distance that you feel to proximity to things, the psychic distance between things. I think that we were beginning to pull apart the different linguistic elements and bring to bear other philosophers who are in the same kind of area. People like Deleuze, who talk about manifestation or signification or understanding, or someone who I sort of looked at this week is named Chris Daver, who's also working similar about the semiotic chora. And her move is to posit, you see, we've already shifted from there, so her move is to posit the idea of speaking
But
itself.
don't do that, don't do
No,
that.
but
I'm just trying to say,
wanted to
what
capture
could
that
you
idea
do?
of the spoken.
Yeah, that's good for
As
us
set
to know.
against the Leotard, where he's actually talking about sort of set against the visual and the silence as well as speaking. He's very big on silences.
Yes,
So.
yes. Do you remember what, thank you. You don't remember what we talked about last week? See, this is the problem. Yeah.
Yeah, but it could be yesterday.
It's right, could be like 4 minutes ago.
I looked at the Hegel
Mhm.
bit. There's a few key pages where you really get into Hegel in that first chapter.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so in short, people didn't really remember everything that was going on except for that.
Sorry.
No, that's
Do you want to
right.
use
Yes,
this to give that
yeah,
to
that's
the-
right.
Sorry, that was good.
Thank you very much.
I do remember trying to think about the question about the difference, which is thicker, the and the arsehole, and I thought that was a really interesting question. And I haven't come to a
Which
conclusion.
is thicker than the
Which has
I was
more
wondering when
thickness?
somebody was going to mention what
Yeah,
really
that
happened
stood
last
out.
week.
That happened. Which is what has more thickness, the or arsehole? That was the cliffhanger last week.
Asshole.
The
Oh,
sorry, arsehole.
Arsehole, I heard.
And so I was trying to think about. I was reading the stuff on thickness a bit, and I didn't understand a remote amount of it. But the difference between a lexical system, so the vocabulary stuff, and the grammatical system. And in his reading, I think he sees that the lexical system, the vocab, has more openness to it. Is that right?
Good.
Completely. And
I
so
mean-
this abandoning ideas, taking on new ones, that the lexical has the ability to do that. Now, how that relates to whether it's thick or thin, I have no idea.
And why should it matter whether or not we're worrying about thick versus thin? What does thick imply if something's thick?
It's difficult to
It
move
has
through.
depth, it is stable, it's also impenetrable, which means that it could be loyal. They could have extra aspects to it. It could be, therefore, good. On the other hand, if it's, quote, too thick, it could be impenetrable, not moving, so on and so forth. So the notion of thick versus thin already becomes a marker, as it were, or an analytic tool, a very light analytic. The term thick or thin is a light analytic tool to begin to think how something matters or even gains matter. So that's the first thing to think about. The second thing to think about with this question of thick versus thin, because we did use the words, or the phrase, we ended up the seminar on the question of the asshole, or the statement of the asshole, because we were talking in very general remarks, and it was suggested that the question was, is the word the, or the concept the, given without even discussing what we mean by thick versus thin, is that the thicker or thinner than the word asshole? Now, asshole, or any other word we could use as a noun, because it's a noun, implies a certain weight, a certain semblance, a certain environment. And it's that weight that Leotard is trying to shift attention from and take it toward the, and saying basically, or things that are either adjectival or in any case not explicitly a noun, like a pronoun or a paraphrase, something that's not fully itself, a nickname even, these kind of half-formed entities. And he's basically saying that they are thicker, they are the basis of the figural in a way that the noun, or in the way that, in this case, the asshole, which presents itself as kind of what it is, however else you want to think of it, you're thinking this entity, it immediately configures a field. So it's quite strong, a noun. A noun is a very strong environment. There's certain colors that are very strong that do the same kind of thing. They act as a way in which something becomes much more of a statement. And once something becomes able to be grounded, stuck, then one can move and begin to build on this ground. It is the argument. Now he's not agreeing with this argument. He's basically going against that position. So I'll start again because I think that we need to maybe have a little bit of a run up to this because I'm concerned that, and I know that there's I have to give you a shorthand version of dialectics. I know that it's not the traditional form. I think that it might be helpful in the next seminar to have read or at least looked at the Hegelian relationship, or what is meant by dialectics on some level, and what would be helpful in that case. And I'm going to explain it now in greater detail. And I know that people have heard this before, but it's helpful, I think, on some level. The thing that you have to remember in talking about meaning is this relationship of silence or negation or the nothing or the empty something that ends up making meaning stick. This is the key, because if something is literal, if A, hang on, I don't think this really works. If A equals A, okay, so we know that this A, let's say they look exactly alike. Clearly they don't look exactly alike, but we know they're both A's. Okay, so this explains this, and this explains this, and that's why they're equal to each other, because they're the same thing, right? So this A and this A, despite the fact that that A is over there and this A is over here, they're the same thing. Okay, we know this. In fact, the most profound thing that a child can show in terms of analytic delivery is when they realize that their two fingers add up to the single number called 2. And that's quite a jump when that happens, when these two things become, these two fingers become this one entity. In this case, they all mean the same thing called A. Now, the issue at hand, I mean, this is why it's so crucial to get this, and again, for those of you that are long in the tooth on this, just hang in on this. Before Vico, Giambattista Vico, and that sort of time period, 1642-ish, right around there. So what's happening in 1642 in this world? There's the Leviathan being written by Thomas Hobbes. There is a civil war in this country. There is a whole manifestation of different things going on across Europe and so on and so forth. And people are trying to think about how change happens without the act of God. That's actually the basic position. Can change occur? Or in what way can one account for change that doesn't require an act of God? So this is the breaking of sort of religiosity. So what happens here is that, let's just pretend this is God, okay? And God gives meaning to all that happens on earth. So the usual way of explaining this is that that's an Archimedean point, and the Archimedean point is the way in which this entity gets established. Now, this is a very old view, and it's still incorporated into art history, art theory, by audience, for example, giving meaning to work. This Archimedean point stands out here and then gives meaning to something. And the meaning, so the question was, could the entity, this business here, exist without audience, God, something else, observer? Could it exist without the? And the short version of the answer was yes. And that is because people were seeing that the actual traditional forms of culture, of life, of everything was changing. And so the question was, is that God's will? This was a big argument, obviously. And in fact, everything is God's will. I mean, that it changes one way is God's will, or if it changes the other way is God's will. It's all God's will. if you believe that the Archimedean point is what's giving meaning, or what, the other way of putting that is what's grounding. Giving meaning means to ground something. If you give something meaning, you give it in a ground. That's the same comment here, just so we're on the same page. So God, audience, artist, whatever it is, gives meaning to this entity. But what if this entity is bubbling up and giving its own meaning, whatever that is? So there's been a different kind of break as to trying to understand how that gets established. And how that meaning, and by meaning we mean how you decide who are you, what is your identity, sexual, name, family, artist, type, consciousness, anything that has that's got a name to it, i.e. noun in this concept, in this way of putting it, and anything that has the name. Now it doesn't have to be a noun, so I'm sorry that was going to, I was thinking about the asshole. So, but anything that has the position of being understood as fully formed entity that you make sense of. That's a very long way of saying how something can form a ground. Itself doesn't necessarily require God, artist, author, whatever. It doesn't require this. And so for people, fake narrative being imposed here as storytelling, as this notion that maybe it's possible to have the society without relating to God. It was the birth of science. And scientia, or science, I mean just science, was in fact philosophy. That's what they called it, science. So they didn't mean by it the science you know today. They meant by it philosophy. That was the science, that was the knowledge of what's going on that doesn't include God in its formulations. Which is not, and then there's a big debate whether or not God should or should not be included, and of course, always up until until the 1800s or 1900s, God was always somehow brought into the question, except parked on the corner. Okay, you're God, you'll stay over there, but we're just going to talk about this. Don't worry. God still is the uber omnipotent scenario that gives meaning. Now, this is the question of ground. This is the question of identity. This is the question of what it means to be fully oneself, itself, a self entity. In this break, the question then became, well, how does this entity account for change? In the rise, I was saying this the other day in the MA class, in the rise to liberalism, in the rise to modernism, is the separation of church and state, basic position. Although I was on a commission a year and a half ago to develop a curricula for 14 to 18-year-olds. And when I suggested that the division of church and state was a primary feature of this society, a secular society, I was condemned. And I was very surprised because this was a government agency that was doing this. And I was seen as that was just too radical to bring out now at this time period, which I thought was depressing. Seeing that this was exactly the thing that people got in trouble for in the 1700s. Anyway, but so the thing about this separation of the church and state, very important. The rise of the individual. The idea that as a social person, as a social agent rather, or as a person, you were a social agent. That's very important to understand, the social agency side of things. That a person could be a doer and not just a receiver, or not just a vessel of God. So this all becomes part of, now the next step to this problem, because just picture this being the asshole, but we'll get back to this. The next problem here is that how does one really account, now I just want to say that if you're doing the MA, you're getting this over a course of a year, so that you're getting this in today is just, so I'm just saying, because you're taking that course, so don't have a nervous breakdown about this. Okay, the question becomes the change, because I'm only going through this because I just feel that it's useless to talk about this if you don't have this other stuff in your back pocket somewhere. Okay, so is that all right? My two people who have heard this 50 million times. Good. Good. All right, so this thing, it becomes the object of study, or the object of if you don't want to say the object of study, then just the point around which all other things are going to be put to one side, because that could be dealt with God. But this will be what we're going to focus on. And this thing is going to be the social, this is going to be culture, this is going to be the state, this is going to be political, this is going to be art, this is going to be identity, this is going to be whatever it is. And this thing is going to be able to deal with this thing called change. Not only is it going to be able to deal with the thing called change, it's going to say that change is precisely what it is. Did you get that? You know, so this is this bubbling thing of life that kind of follows the motto, the more things change, the more things remain the same. I mean, so somehow everything's changing, but at the same time you still have tradition, you still have heritage, you still have culture, you still have these various things going on. So various thinkers, philosophers, scholars, whatever, physicists, scientists, different, began to try and understand how could change be part of this thing without going outside the system. So see this as the system. And this system, so not to go outside, so how do you account for change within the system? So if you have A equals A plus 0, you know that this entity here is going to equal this, even though you got 2 extra points, because we're not outside the system. We're not really saying A plus, or let me not use A, let's say 1 plus 3 equals 7. We're not saying that, sorry. I'm upside down. We're not using that system. That is just a nonsense in our system. We're saying, how can you stay within the system and look at how all of its constituted parts have little breakages to them, and at the same time are themselves changing without going so wildly changeable that you can't predict anything. So the second thing you have to understand that's happening during this Renaissance, this time, is the way in which probability, prediction, and change all becomes a part of knowledge. It becomes, in fact, the central part of knowledge. And that the next thing is that rather than a fact equals a fact equals a fact, that is a literal meaning of something, instead what starts happening is that certainty becomes the truth. So rather than a solid A equaling a solid A as all that there is, suddenly, or not suddenly, but eventually you have this notion that this formula, as it were, I'm using it as formulas, as obviously not just formulas, becomes what is certain. And it's the certainty that forms the ground of one's truth. In our time period, it's the uncertainty. So that's where we're going with this. So by the time we get to Lyotard, sorry, by the time we get, sorry, by the time we get to Lyotard and all the postmodernists, they're going to be arguing that the ground is uncertain. But we're not there yet, okay? So just follow, the question of certainty as the ground of knowledge is the crucial point here, not a static X. The ground isn't like something you stand on in that sense. It's a certain something, whatever that is. And as a result, the ground is itself, you know, made up of flakes and crumbly, and it's got moisture. And this is why things like telos, actually I love doing things like this. Okay, telos, which I was talking about before, which is the unfolding. So this is the acorn, and this is, yeah, come on in. Are you coming for the
No. Yes. Talk to you.
To talk to me.
Yes. I sent you an email last week about the exchange program.
We can't do that right at this minute, as you can
Yes.
see. Can you come back by 4:30? Or
Cool.
tomorrow?
Tomorrow. What time?
I don't know. Give me an
Okay.
email. Sorry.
No worries.
Okay. Telos accounts for change where an acorn becomes a tree, and then the tree reads itself back to the meaning of acorn. So an acorn knows that it, or knows, not in that conscious sense, but one can see that eventually somewhere along the way, little leaves are going to show up, little ground, little water, right? It turns out this way. So you know what needs to be done in order for it to get like that. And so getting like that forms the basis, the ground, of this acorn. Well, that's a movable ground. That's a movable ground. That it probably will turn out like this is the certainty aspect. That this is, so if you do X, Y, Z, probably this will happen and it'll not turn into a bottle of water. It'll just do this. And as I've said many times, that's fine if you are an acorn, but if you happen to be anything other than like an oppressed group of some kind, or even not an oppressed group, you're trying to challenge identity as such to unfold to become whatever it is that you're always expected to be and then have that read back into you. That's the problem here. Is there a question on that? Any questions on that? Because that's so key. So telos is an ancient Greek, and not just ancient Greek, form of thinking that gets brought into this notion of the system as this movable notion of place that it has energy to it, has blood and guts. It's not just this abstract thing called the ground, or it's not just this thing based on authority. It is true because God says it's true, or I say it's true, or somebody has made a rule and that's why it's true. It's true because the ground is certain, not because there's an authority figure saying that that's how you have to think. So once you get rid of authority, once you go the whole way and say, okay, we're only going to deal with this little bit here, a whole bunch of problems come up. And those problems are basically all that are part of the whole modern scope of analysis, of science, of philosophy, of art. All these questions of what type of frame do you have? With a lot of painting, breaking the frame in order to get outside the system. But you're never getting outside. So you could break 40 frames and you'd still be in the system. Doesn't matter how far you push that frame off, you're still in the system. How many people saw the guy jump from the space capsule? That was pretty amazing. I mean, that was just shocking. I mean, I actually found myself welling up, you know, and thinking, you know, this is just incredible. One of the things he was doing, other than wasting his time and being a crazy person and this kind of thing, was going to this thing called the edge of the stratosphere. That was just fascinating to me, that he would be in this weird moment. It's not like, you know, here's the edge and there's this other side. It's this different notion of what an edge is, that he was there right before he slipped outside of gravity. So right before you slip outside of gravity, they figured out it was 127,000 miles above the Earth or something like that. And he jumped out of a spaceship. Now, and then he landed on his feet, which is kind of amazing, because I can remember when space capsules couldn't land. They had to land in the ocean. You know, so that a person could land like that was shocking. And of course they kept saying, you know, will his blood boil? Like, you know, whatever. I mean, I did think that this was a pathway to all military maneuvers now. People are now thinking about how different ways to jump out of things and whatever. So of course I was depressed. But it was also phenomenal because the frame has now shifted again. You can literally see the shifting of the frame of where those edges could possibly be. So this question of the frame and the authority that allows a frame to be established is what's at issue here, particularly around Enlightenment thinking, and is who has the right to make the frame? Who has the right to break the frame. These are all very important political questions, aesthetic questions, and these are questions that are no longer being asked, or no longer being asked in that way. Because for all intents and purposes, the frame has been broken. The system has been altered. And it's basically been altered because of the information age, but I'll get back to that. So this system, where the notion of truth, again, this is the other thing to remember, where truth, or aletheia, equals certainty, where certainty is no longer authority. Certainty is, in fact, a ground. It's a very different thing. Truth is certainty, but that certainty is itself now problematized, because now the next question becomes, I'm going to throw all the paper away. The next question becomes, if this thing is going to really deal with the world, then it can't really be this flat thing. Sort of more has to be like a globe, or, you know, anyway, have kind of a consistency to it. Except the consistency it has can't be one that actually has a consistency. Because if it actually has a consistency, then you're taking as a given what you're trying to prove and inserting it into the picture. And with the analysis, you want a tool. You don't want something that's already thought of prior to its toolness to be sitting there. I'm not sure if that made sense to you, but I'll just for the time being, this is no longer a or two-dimensional structure. This is, think of it as a three-dimensional structure, except for the fact it's still a system, and you can't get outside the system any more than you get outside of air. There's no getting outside of the system. So the question then becomes, if A is equal to A, that, like I said, that doesn't tell you anything. It just tells you itself. You know, if baby girl is going to equal, you know, big woman later, that's still not going to really tell you anything, even though you are now accounting for change in the sense you're getting to deal with age, or you're getting to deal with height, or something like that. You're getting to deal with something else. It's still not telling you anything. It's not really an identity as such. So the question was, how do you account for change and this kind of fullness, and really account for it, as opposed to just having it as your opinion that it should be the case? Well, the answer was that whatever the answer had to be, it had to be something you didn't add to the system by your own view. It's something it's in the system because the system is itself fully contained, and nothing falls outside the system. So it's the whole truth, a truth that is certainty. It's the whole truth and nothing but the truth. That's the whole system there. Now, Hegel, I mean, scrolling forward thousands of, you know, jumps of conceptual things, realized that in order to talk about the whole truth and for something to be within the system, you had to be able to add something to the system that would not distort the wholeness of the system. And what he added to the system was nothing. And it's probably one of the most, or it's a certain form of negation, it's one of the most important things that you could think about. If you think about the term nothing as something that has some form of a positivity, except it's not, and it's also not a negative of something, it's not like the inversion of something, it's just a nothing that, and it's not a placeholder either. It's not like holding a place that'll be filled with something. It's a totally different animal named nothing. And this totally different animal named nothing, or named negation, which are also complicated, but anyway, just for the time being, this animal can be added, and it will start to allow for the way in which the system, the whole system, can be accounted for without going outside the system, without going to authority, without going to God, Archimedean point, audience. And so Hegel develops the argument that everything, not everything is subjective, but he emphasizes the way in which this nothing creates one's meaning, creates subjectivity. it's crucial. And it is in every single philosophical, aesthetic, artistic moment forward. This point, yes.
So you're thinking, for example, that woman is not man? Is that the...
No.
Right, okay.
No, not at all. Oh, okay, glad you said that. No, in fact, exactly the reverse. That woman not man, or man not woman, is posing the frame in a two-dimensional way, where the line is drawn like this, or in fact, the frame would be like this, where man is on one side and woman is on the other side, and you take it together and you get the whole human race, or something like that. Which is idiotic, because that's taking as a given what you're trying to prove, etc., etc. Apart from the fact it's just stupid anyway. And so Hegel's not saying that woman is on this side and man is on this side. Hegel's saying that all that there is on this side. That's called, let's say, don't wince, Mark. It's called thesis. And all thesis really means, in this example, is taking a position to starting, the start. Okay, now Hegel really doesn't start with thesis. He starts with the not thesis, the antithesis. So on the other side is the antithesis. I'm writing it as antithesis, but it's antithesis without the dash. So, and it means literally that, not thesis. Thesis, not thesis. Thesis, not the, and so no matter how you do this paper, unless you make it into a one-dimensional paper, thesis will always be on this side, and antithesis will always be on this side. But of course, that's an abstraction. What Hegel is saying is that if you take the thesis and you bring it into the antithesis, which is called sublation, in this example, and then so the thesis, the antithesis, thesis gets brought into the antithesis, they synthesize and create the ground. So the telos is a little bit more sophisticated here, in the sense that, well, it's a lot more sophisticated, in the sense that what is produced as the goal is in fact the synthesis of two abstract positions. And this so-called coming back around is immanence or becoming. You've heard all these terms before. And that produces the certainty for the rest of the story. So these become fuller points. I'll explain it this way. Let's say the synthesis was the capitalist mode of production. And you say, bourgeoisie on one side, workers on the other, taken together, create the capitalist mode of production. That comes around, the capitalist mode of production, and gives meaning to these two sides, and so it goes. And so for Marx, or in the Communist Manifesto anyway, not all of Marxism, but for the Communist Manifesto, he argues, obviously, either the bourgeoisie is going to leave this little system thing, or the working class is going to leave it. And so he argues that the bourgeoisie are not going to leave it, because they have too much invested. So the workers are going to leave it. Of course, some portion of the workers didn't leave it either, but that's another issue. And that's how capitalism would fall. Because that's just to give you a sense of how the synthesis is working. So the synthesis mode of production is actually the ground that gives meaning to the whole system. So you're not outside the system. You can't come to the system this way. It's just within the system produces something that gives it its shape, that gives it its contour, that gives it its fullness. And what Hegel is trying to say here is not man, woman, although we could actually use that, but I think it'd be better to say man, not man, whatever that is. Because it's all of man and all of not man added together. So you could say wet and not wet. Because dry is, of course, the synthesis of wet, not wet. And whether it becomes wet or whether it becomes dry in the synthesis is how this thing is actually combined. That's the key. How one of them gets sublated to the other. If let's say this is the not wet. Not wet. If not wet gets sublated into the wet, then big wet big concept wet comes and creates the ground around which one can understand wet and not wet. Except you don't talk like that, wet, not wet. You talk wet, dry. And so the same thing. So that wet is a feature of dry. It's not like the other side of dry. It is actually a condition of dry. And so that's what Hegel's getting at. These abstractions condition.
Just parametricizing.
And what do you mean by that?
Well, the wet and not wet parameters.
Yes, parameters.
Yeah.
Yes. Parameters. Yes, that's probably a good way. But the way it's said in, just so you have the term, the way it's said in analytic thinking is in terms of abstract versus concrete. So something is a concrete concept, or in fact something is a concept by which is meant a concrete concept, when nothing can be added or taken out of it, when it's the whole thing. Otherwise it's just an opinion, or a position, or an abstraction, which is all very interesting but not interesting enough. So the key here is the beauty of how the system makes itself as a system by relying on contradiction and antagonism. The contradiction is thesis. What's the contradiction of thesis? Not thesis. But that doesn't tell you, that is just a very bad way of understanding the frame. Because the full way of understanding the frame is to know that it's the thesis contradicted with the not thesis, taken together, creates the synthesis, comes back around and makes the ground. So it's the full, it's got dimension to it. This was a breakthrough, and Hegel, nobody beats Hegel on this. And so what he says here is that, and here's why this is subjective, because he creates truth subjectively as certainty. He shows how truth must be certain, as opposed to static, as opposed to just there, as opposed to a flat bar. And more importantly, this thing that keeps coming around, this way of talking, that, you know, there's different words, immanence, becoming, even transcendence at some point later. He's trying to show that you're not adding anything to the system, and you're not taking anything out of the system. And so that thing is the negative. So for Hegel, he starts with the not, with the now, with the that which can't be mediated, the here, right now, the nothing. He starts with that form of absence, and from that develops the system. Now, we'll have a longer tutorial on this, because this is important, but I want to just get back to this. So the crucial, the thing that is at stake here, like, why should we care about this? Why does it matter? The system, not the system? I mean, this way of thinking is in tandem with very specific forms of the growth of science, in particular, and in particular Newtonian physics, which is basically two objects don't occupy the same place at the same time, basically. But what if two objects could occupy the same place at the same time? Or what if, for example, a cohesive system, or that is to say, something that is cohesive and therefore a system, not a system in this totalizing sense, but another form of system, could create meaning or identities without either requiring God on the one hand, or forming a universal on the other. Well, that's called quantum mechanics, actually. But philosophically, aesthetically, politically, it's got a whole other game going on. I mean, it's got a very similar game going on to this. And that similar game is that no longer is certainty at the basis of the ground, but uncertainty, or what will be called, for lack of a better way of putting it, surface, or the groundless ground you probably heard about, or you may have heard about. This becomes the way in which one begins to articulate difference. Now, you're nodding. Are you nodding because you're following the argument, or are you nodding because you have a crick in your neck?
Okay.
What are you hearing?
I suppose I think about it in terms of quantum mechanics.
And?
You know, how things have certain, there's no sort of solid objective state. There's states, there's, you know, like wave particle dualities, there's things exist in different states unless until you create something from them, I suppose.
Yeah, okay.
That's the best way to put it into words.
But the you who does the creating isn't really you, right? Who's the you that does the creating? When you say how does it emerge as something? If you're not going to follow a dialectical thought process, then how does it emerge? This becomes, and this is the kind of question that Thingy is answering. Yeah, yeah.
I was just wondering whether the quantum mechanics does follow a kind of dialectic, in the sense that it sits, that you have someone like Einstein as a mathematical realist or a physical realist who really thought the world could be mapped out in mathematics and there was a real world. And then, which is fair enough, that's one kind of scientist, and another kind of scientist who doesn't really believe in the mathematical realism. Again, it doesn't really matter because the processes they use are similar anyway, but the end results are only different end results. So in quantum mechanics, you have the idea that the Einsteinian world has kind of collapsed. There's no locality is the norm. That there, as you said, having two things exist at the same place at the same time, which is this non-expandable idea within quantum mechanics of entangling particles, as it were, where there's no usable signal. Otherwise, they'd be breaking the speed limit, as it were, the speed of light.
Right.
But that's set against the mathematical realism. But if you go for mathematical realism, you have to understand that the phenomena, the tools, and the people that we use to engage with quantum mechanical field theory or something like this, isn't up to the job. It cannot explain these strange entangling particles, the non-locality, which seems to be the norm. There's no usable signal, so it's actually equivalent to nothing, as it were, because it's just what happens and we don't know why. What it is. Is it two particles? Is it one space? You know, is it the something in quantum mechanical field theory? Everything relating to a something. But it seems as though that there's the mathematical realist set against the quantum field.
Well, as you
then create the ground, which is then called physics, modern physics.
But I mean, no, I think that that's not quite right, because I think that what you're leaving out is the other aspect, which is called the elsewhere. And not that we're going to get into that at the moment, but I mean, because this elsewhere thing becomes yet another sort of dangling participle, as it were, of the whole system, except because it's not really in the system, but it's not in the system. And this becomes part of a different way of understanding how something can create a foundation around which claims can be made, whatever those claims are. So, so black matter, ether, all this other stuff, they're not quite, let's say, interpretable via this method. But on the other hand, very little is interpreted via that method. So I mean, the question I'm trying to get at is, or what I'm trying to lead us to in this kind of truncated view of how to know what you're dealing with here, is that the question of identity has been located in dialectics for so long that it's very difficult to break out of that. And what usually happens is that there's an argument between all that there is and all that there's not, so that if you are seeing identity as either a thesis or an antithesis put together, then the only way to comment on that is to become the so-called in-between. And the in-between is a analytic trope. It's an analytic false picture, because there is no in-between, really, if you get out of this kind of system. If you get out of this kind of system, either you come back to this system, the Archimedean point system, or you go forward into some other system that either brings in just opinions, in which case it's kind of like the old Socratic question, you know, who wins after everybody's fighting? Well, the one that's last standing. So, I don't know. That's not going to be good enough. What we need to try and get a sense of, I'm not sure if this is just going way too fast or way too slow. I'm not sure which it is at this point, but is why would Lyotard then, or not why would Lyotard, I don't mean why would Lyotard do this, but in what way does this book, does this argument that's presented in this book deal with the impasse as is perceived, where Hegel takes the sort of position thus far but no farther? That's the question, because even with Marx, with with a lot of the Frankfurt School, people are not getting away from Hegel. Not that you have to or don't have to, but if you're going to break with the notion of the ground as being something other than a synthetic unity, that therefore then brings in contradiction and movement and this kind of thing, and want to figure out how to deal with it so that it's not always already taking in what it's trying to talk about or deal with, then Lyotard offers this as a way forward. So, because I'm thinking about your work right now, the images in your work, and
I've got some really crude questions to ask.
Okay, what is the
speaking
asshole?
about?
Okay. Okay, what?
If we've replaced this Archimedean thing with observation.
No, but we haven't replaced with observation. That's the whole point.
Right.
Well,
that's what I'm trying to understand.
Okay,
Because it seems to
sorry.
me where observation is always going to.
No, I think that
Place us.
often I've seen, at least in art schools, and not just in art schools, there is an emphasis on the importance of the audience in understanding one's work, that kind of thing. So there's always some sort of Archimedean point. There's always some kind of outside that's taken as a given. You're dealing with the outside. You're dealing, how is you going to curate something? You're going to deal with the audience, something like that. So what happens when the work doesn't require, not only doesn't require, but never required the audience? So it's a different way of turning the questions on what is that work doing. What is the death of the author in this thing, or the painter, the subject position or from which that work emanates? That's what's being put on the table. That's one of the things that's being put on the table. And the thing is that the question of representation is key here, because all of these comments that are being drawn up here, literally drawn up here, are talking about how the present as the basis of the now, of the no thing, of the antithesis. You start somewhere. Where are you going to start? You're going to start where there is nothing. You start where there is nothing, and from nothing you counterpose it to that which could be counterposed directly to the nothing, which has to be the anti thing, right? Because the anti-antithesis is what is opposite to antithesis, right? That's the contradictory point. So if you're going to start on an abstract level, you're going to say that I'm going to start with absolutely nothing. I'm going to start with this vague, or just nothing, and I'm going to counterpose it with something, with the something that is point for point the other side of the antithesis. And taking that together, that'll create a synthesis which then produces the ground. In the Hegelian move, that is, you start with the now, you counterpose it with the not now, or sorry, you start with the not thing, the no thing, you counterpose it with thing, and it creates, in its first manifestation, intuition. And intuition then comes back around. This is actually a fun diagram. So you start with nothing. You counterpose it with thing. So you have antithesis. You counterpose it with thing. This is sublated into thesis. It forms a synthesis. The synthesis that Hegel names this immediate moment. The not mediated moment is the no thing, the immediate, the immediate, im-mediate, not mediated moment is the no thing. Once it's mediated, once it's the very first thing that gives it its first clue of mediation, he calls intuition. And intuition then comes back around and gives meaning, gives substance, gives verve, gives energy. So the intuitive becomes the very first spot of knowledge. Okay? Now this is where a lot of people, mainly, not just artists, but a lot of artists, just, that's it. They just intuit something and then I'm done for the day. Okay, so what Hegel says, well, that's just the very, very beginning, because now what you do is that this thing that's become the ground, which is intuition, which is now big I intuition, because now it's conceptual intuition, that is to say it's fully formed. It's not just some sort of abstract half-life, as it were, of something. It is fully an intuition. That then is counterposed to the not intuition, which he calls sense certainty. So the abstract form, sense certainty, pitted against intuition. So intuition gives substance to the sense of something, the sense being slightly stronger than intuition in this case. Because you notice the word certainty here. This gets sublated into sense certainty, and together it forms the concept of sense, of sense certainty. And now the concept of sense certainty comes back around and now forms the ground. Now if you just stopped right there, you would have the sense certain, the certain sense, the fact that something is certain, and it's backed by intuition and the immediacy of the moment. And most art environments, again, pretty much stop at this point. Okay. Now, what Hegel says is actually, now we'll keep going, because in fact sense certainty isn't the finished product yet. In fact, now you have, next to sense certainty, perception. Okay, and perception in this stage is an abstract version counterposed to this other stage that has gone through a number of, let's say, mutations, and it's carrying with it, notice how it's carrying with it time, it's carrying with it the immediacy, it's carrying with it immediate all the way through. So that your perception then, all of this now gets sublated into perception. Perception becomes the synthesis. Here's perception. Perception is now what's created from this. This comes back around and now forms the ground of this whole mess, whole thing. So now perception, when it forms the ground of truth, perception, when it forms the ground of truth, it's made up of immediacy, intuition, but they're not just made up like a list. They're made up in this sublated sense, so they're always becoming the fullness of what they can be and nothing more and nothing less. So when perception becomes the whole picture, it is then set against understanding. That's a U, understanding. And then when understanding swallows this up, sublates this whole thing, this turns out to become, you know, the conceptual form of understanding. So, and that becomes basically this is where most social sciences end. They stop it here at this point, at the understanding. They use understanding as a tool to begin to see things. And then what Hegel says is actually, now we got one last step. We've got this last step which says that the entire process, thank you, like so, is counterposed by knowledge. And knowledge sweeps all of this into itself, synthesizes it, comes back around, and forms the ground of this whole picture. So so all of this forms knowledge. Knowledge is at the top, and it comes back around and forms the ground of all of this. So knowledge is both the beginning and the highest point for Hegel. It's crucial to sort of get how this operates in this all of the synthesizing forms in this, and then when you look at it this way, you can see that you haven't really moved anywhere. There's movement, but actually it's all within the rounded, or you know, the globular universal called knowledge system. Now, in order to really get a hold of the importance of Hegel in this moment, is to understand where he puts negation in this. And it's not just at the beginning here, because negation falls through this whole patterning, or this whole process rather. And we need to read on it in order for you to really grasp it properly. But the idea here is that this notion of a knowledge system is what is called a universal. That's what it is to be universal. It isn't anything other than what it is to be. But it is not what is to be in the telos sense, like the acorn unfolds to become a tree. That can never be anything other than what it's supposed to be. In this case, it can be changed. Hegel is the first to account for change that isn't like that there's some sort of diagram inside yourself that's unfolding a certain way. He's basically saying that's why this is subject. He's talking about this as the subject. And it forms the object of life, but it's a subjective object. In other words, it's not just, so all objects are subjective objects, as it were. So objectivity itself, the truth of anything, is both movable, changeable, but it's not relative in the sense that it works here but not, let's say, in China. It's not relative at that level. It's changeable, but it's changeable in a universal environment, not in an environment that goes back to either your own intuition or your sense certainty, because the smaller slices of it won't hold up. And so the claim against postmodernism, I think might be obvious at this point, is that it can't account for change other than returning to an opinion and saying, well, I just think it's better in the end. Sorry, that's where I'm coming from. It can't really, not until now, I mean, anyway, until, not just Lyotard, but I mean, until this move toward trying to think in terms of multiple constellations and what is now called multiversals. This is a universal. So to ask a question like thickness or thinness is to ask you to think about the surface of this universal. And now we're in head games, and it's very complex. And it's not just head games for sport, although it might not be such a tragedy for it just to be like that. But it feels like it's a head game, or anyway, it's just like, you know, again, pretend that this table is the concept. Pretend that this table is now the manifestation of this sort of mad diagram, that this is knowledge, this table. This table, the concept table, is the table and the reality of table is the whole thing. Okay, that is it. And I ask you to paint the surface of the table. And the question becomes, of course, what is the surface of this table? Is the surface of the table the top? Or is the surface of the table all those things that hit the air, which would then also be the bottom? Or is the surface those things that aren't included in the structure of the table, but can't live outside the table? So in other words, if I shaved off this top and threw it somewhere, there would now be a new surface they'd have to paint. And the old surface would have been gone, would not be anything anymore. So I could become really psychotic with you. I'm just saying, you keep shaving off things, keep painting the table, paint the table, paint the surface, paint the surface. Where's the surface? Now what Lyotard argues is that, let's see if you can follow this here. This forms the ground. This dialectic forms the ground. Lyotard is saying, just give me the surface. Get rid of all the other things, like the Cheshire cat's smile. Just bring me the head of the surface, nothing else. That's all I want, is the surface. Because it's the surface thing that's not connected to an entity, or to an entity that is a closed system, that will yield a different kind of ethics, he's arguing, ethics, universality, politics, that neither privileges this, let's say, poor version of man versus woman, black versus white, gay versus straight, whatever the thing is, these kind of divisions. And in fact, rethinks, or re-shifts it so that things without edges become the ground. Well, the only thing without edges, really at the moment anyway, and without dimension, without weight, without size, without frame, is the surface. And now we're back to Leonardo, what's his face, Leonardo. Because it's Leonardo, way back when, in his little diagrams of how do you paint a surface, he was obsessed with this question. And I can see why now. He was really interested in how does, in his notebooks, I have to go, it's in there somewhere, where he explains how a surface can be painted. And it's not the trick, or it's not just the trick of perception. Perception meaning literally seeing how it forms, but the way in which distances play off each other. And so it's a different form of the ground. And Lyotard is asking, how thick can that surface be to really get yourself irritated? Or thin? He wants to move it off the noun, pronoun, linguistic turns that have been so characteristic of modernity, and move it onto this other way of dealing with language. The language that can't be made into these framed environments, but at the same time aren't so all over the map that nobody can understand each other. They can actually communicate. So that brings us to the chapter 1 of Lyotard. But in order to get there, it's, I mean, you don't have to, this is very, very light sense of Hegel, obviously. I mean, it goes in many, many different directions. But you just need to get a sense of the profundity of what what Hegel is doing, both with and against God. Because, of course, knowledge for Hegel is the highest form of spirit. And it's not by accident, it's spirit, as opposed to, I don't know what, magic tricks. It's the highest form. And there's the other thing to think about here, and this is why I've always asked my students to ban the word perception in the class until they really know what they're talking about. Because if someone starts with the argument, well, my perception is the same word as my opinion, you know, in fact, at that point, it's lower on the totem pole than intuition. Intuition's stronger than my perception, you know, because in fact, it is the intuition they're talking about. So until one actually manifests what really perception is about, which is what Merleau-Ponty starts talking about in his body-skin environments, but of course he's trying to bring this to a better usage in a certain sense, or a better usage is, I always struggle for ways to put this, because I don't mean it in a utilitarian sense. I mean, there's a way in which one tries to show how change and knowledge and one's opinion and one's imagination are circle each other, but at the same time they matter. So they make matter happen. There's a mattering that's going on, and this mattering is what he's trying to take care of. He's trying to talk to. So when the mattering of the thickness and the thinness start happening, you know, like for example, we could come up with what it means to be gay. I mean, I can tell you that when I was in South Africa actually, being a gay male was just made legal, and I was filming there, and I was taking films of people, I was in gay men's bars, and people would introduce their partner as their husband. They would say, "This is my husband," and you're like, and we're not talking about marriage. It was because the notion of gay male was the person was gay if they were receiving sex, anal sex, and were straight if they were the sort of the guy who was doing the sex. It was just how it was. It didn't matter how you were thinking about it. It didn't matter all the concepts, all the arguments, whatever. That's just what it was. And same thing in the lesbian world. When I was in Mexico, I got stoned. I mean, stoned like with stones, not like, you know, people stoned me when I went to a bar because they knew it was a lesbian bar. But the lesbians were those people who looked like men, I mean, that, you know, in quotes. And the straight girls were the ones that didn't look like men. That's pretty much as simple as it got. Now, it took years for a gay movement to move that off the radar like that. And it wasn't just a concept that did it, it was these material realities that started getting dropped on the surface. These nodes, this is what he's trying to talk about here, these kind of little bits, scraps, how you place them and how they then coagulate to create the ground that makes sense. You know, I don't know how many people have watched the American debates without having a heart attack, but anyway, recently, you know, the presidential debates are going on, and Obama, for anybody that has even listened to the jokes about it, I mean, he looked like he was drugged, actually. I mean, all I can think of was either he was drugged or he had some pressing problem unrelated to the presidential debates going on, like the world is going to blow up, or I don't know what's going to be for dinner, or something. It was some other thing was, you know, occupying this man's mind than the debate. And the jokes that went on were actually hilarious. I mean, I am obviously an Obama supporter, but I mean, even I find them like totally hilarious. But a lot of people that I was with, including my partner, and so all things deduced from her view, small facts, you know, couldn't read it, couldn't read the culture. Didn't find it funny, didn't find it not funny, didn't know, you know, because everything drops on the surface, these little nodal things that he's trying to talk about. So the materiality of a reality, while in a kind of bigger sense, this helps, when it comes down to really, or an argument can be made that when it comes down to trying to look at how this is operating, it is a lot better than telos, but doesn't quite make it to trying to come up with these mad ideas like don't want to be a slave, or maybe you know, not you know, to overthrowing class, or trying to deal something different with paint, like what Jacqueline was doing, you know, the way in which she's arranging painting without anything to do with paint, actually, or very little. She's just taking it way off the canvas. You know, all these things are considered completely insane on some level. I mean, not that she's considered insane, but these are considered very unusual. Or this photography here, this photograph that's done by Van Molson. I mean, he built it. He built the photograph with strips, with a camera that he built. It's a 360-degree thing. I have it upside down, but actually it doesn't really matter because it's 360 degrees, so it's going to be on its end if you wanted it to be. Yeah, so these are all things that are breaking the ways in which you're supposed to see them to start with. And so how does one deal with this so that A, it's useful, so you can incorporate in your own work, or B, that it matters. It creates a matter. It requires understanding what nothingness is, what negation is, what the dialectic is, what subjectivity is, what objectivity is, what negative dialectics is, what the breakdown of it is, what universality is, and how that sort of falls apart or doesn't fall apart. So you know when there are like comments being made in here that it actually resonates, and that you're not actually just, you know, just sort of, you know. Actually, I was at a meeting today. Probably shouldn't say this, where I brought in Solomon and the you know, the splitting of the baby. Of course, I forgot that it was Solomon because I'm so tired. I thought it was Saul. No wonder nobody understood what I was talking about. And I was like, you know, Saul with the baby, you know, they're like, what the hell? Yeah. Like this kind of thing. It's like that. If you start just talking, you know, it just goes over your head. So in order for it to somewhere land, so it's like making something, you have to have a little bit of a sense of this. How are we doing without me having been now on a roll? Is any of this coming in?
So it was making me think of, there's a bit where he starts talking about how the reality is like a small part of, is a smaller part of, or a part of the imaginary, or the imaginary sort of is a bigger, rather than sort of usually I have this reality as if imagination was a subset within it or something. But he talks about he's sort of talking about truth, but then he goes on to this few pages about reality and the imaginary. But, well, that seems to connect.
Yes, I mean, actually Nietzsche has a very famous line, when the real world at last became a myth. He fights for this right, to think of the real world finally as a myth. Is not completely analogous, but it's something along those lines. When you're right, when imagination isn't a feature of reality, it is reality. But it's reality not at the level of, you know, well, if I just think I can fly, I'm going to fly. It's not that level of reality. It's the way in which it's the way in which imagination creates a materiality, an actual something that you can grab. But it's also, and this is where you get into a Foucauldian move. So he's talking about here knowledge is power. You know, Foucault talks about the famous knowledge is power argument. When knowledge, as these nodal points, these like bird droppings on the planes of immanence kind of thing. When knowledge acts like this, the ways in which the discourse can begin to put them together creates a power, creates a form of power. I was saying to the MA class on Thursday, which has 38 people in it at the moment, which is a little bit disturbing. Anyway, side note, that saying no is crucial to power. Not saying can't, as in I can't do it. Not no at that level. No as I won't do it. Very different no. But the saying of no is very profound as a first step to enlightenment thinking, actually. Because when you realize you actually can say no, of course, it could be that when you say no, the whole world falls apart. The flat Earth society comes back on. Actually, what I was surprised about, I say this with love, since you were there, but I was a little bit surprised that people didn't know what the Copernican revolution was, or for that matter, kept confusing Galileo and Copernicus. Anyway, we know that Copernicus, just so we're all clear about this, I'm not going to embarrass you by asking you what it is, but just so we know that with Copernicus, the world was no longer considered flat, okay? And not Galileo. Galileo did something else. He realized that the sun was the center of the universe. Okay? Okay, so those are the two very different things. But with the Copernican revolution, we still have flat Earth people today. Inside of us, we have the flat Earth view. Because why else would one not say no? You don't say no often because you think you will fall off the side of the Earth, and because you often might fall off the side of the Earth. You might get excommunicated from your people, from your ways of living, from whatever, from a job or arrested or something. So, off. So this idea of knowing how to say no, and not just that you can say no, is like the sort of next step, the how of the no. And then the fact that the how of the no, as part of a strategy for movement, for exit, is of course the next step. And of course you can't exit if you don't realize that you're in a system to start with. So then what's the system that you're exiting from, big or small? And so on, so on it goes. Now, are we ready to turn to Leotard? Or no? Do you want to take a break, or are you okay? Or what do you want to do with yourselves? Or do you want to ask questions on this? We can ask questions on this, perhaps. Hi, Lisa. I'm staring at her.
Okay, I've got
No pressure, Lisa.
I've got a question and a comment.
Okay.
One is a question about sense certainty, and the other is a comment about the difference between reverse discourse and silence.
Okay.
So I'm kind of getting this the sublation of one thing into the nothing, or vice versa, in terms of that move from perception, understanding, knowledge. But what I don't quite get is where the sense certainty vis-a-vis the intuition sits in relation to the antithesis and the antithesis. So I'm not quite sure what that.
Okay.
That
Think
is.
of the thesis antithesis, or the wet not wet,
Yeah.
as the same words. Wet not wet, thesis antithesis. They're not saying anything. I could have said meh, like that and then that. Okay. That's what thesis antithesis means. They don't stand for anything other than inverses of each other in this example. Okay. When you start putting meat on the bones, as it were, when you start putting clothes on them, they start getting their names, as it were. The names in the real sense of the word to name, which is to give a concept to something. Okay, so and not just to give the concept, but to have the concept grow into itself, into a concept, to its fully formed self. So in order to get away from this, that I'm just going to, that one implies the other, right? In order to get away from that, antithesis, antithesis, or antithesis, thesis, not wet, wet. You could say intuition, not intuition. But the difference being is that the not intuition now already is established with a whole bunch of stuff that's sort of filling up the contours of what is to say not intuition. So no longer does that mean lit. It actually means not immediate. It means immediate, sublated into the not immediate, creates the way in which one can appreciate or take the immediate is to invoke intuition, or to invoke something, and we're going to call that something intuition at that stage. And then once that gets sort of established, the way to work it, that becomes a sense certainty.
So once the immediate, so the nothing in a way,
The input not mediated, basically.
becomes
Mediated.
mediated, that's when the intuition
Yes,
concept
but don't
occurs.
think of it like step one, like you're walking, like don't think of it like this, like intuition, perception, sense certainty. Like don't think of it like one after the other, because it's not going anywhere. It's all there together. It's like the rings of a tree, as I said before. So you have the tree. This is the tree trunk. you can't really pull, I mean, I guess you could pull out the rings, but it's kind of, there's no purpose in it other than to say it's an abstract pulling out of the ring. Okay, together, that's knowledge, or that's tree trunk. Okay, which each ring, you know, starting with the immediate, the not mediated, is right there, and then it, you know, gets bigger and bigger, but it's not really going anywhere. So it's not like one comes after the other.
But how does sense certainty get sublated into perception, or is because
And how does any of it get presented?
Isn't sense certainty perception?
No, this is Hegel's point. Sense certainty is, let's say, I mean, I'm going to explain it in a hierarchically linear sense, which is completely wrong. Okay, but just to give you a sense, like intuition, you could think is a kind of whimsical, or I don't know, maybe even you know, centuries of learning that's in your being. You know, intuition. However you want to put it, it's not like organized thinking in that sense. It starts to get organized. That's sense certainty. That's when you can be. I mean, I'm just going to say it like this: you can be fairly certain. You can assume that it's true based on the pattern of knowledge that it creates, but it's not. That's not enough of a proof. And that the perception, when you say, well, that person's really perceptive, you don't really mean that they're full of sense certainty. Not really. You mean that they're slightly more intelligent than sense certainty. Sense certainty gives you like the facts, gives you the ability to come up with a pattern, gives you the ability to, let's say, interpret the pattern, but not to come up with a pattern, that there is a pattern. But the perception allows you to give it its interpretation. But it's still at the level of an interpretation, by which is not meant that it's necessarily completely true. But that's not to say that truth itself is completely true, because truth itself is made up of all this. So the most true is still subjective. Make sense? Yeah. Okay. So what was the other one?
God knows.
Reverse something or other?
Yeah, no, you kind of bringing Foucault into it, in terms of the ability to say no.
Yeah.
Of power needs no, and that the kind of reverse discourse. So, you know, people, you know, kind of queers are being called shameful, terrible, so we're going to take on this pride label. So
yeah, right.
You know, the either or of it. And it was just a comment really about, I'm just wondering whether I'm on the right lines in terms of Jonathan Katz talking about silence in relation to Rauschenberg, Cage, Jasper Johns, and the way that they use that as a kind of oppositional stance, but not a reverse stance. So
right.
It's not saying no, but it's
an antagonism, it's not a contradiction.
So it's not easily as placed in that.
Well,
thing.
There's two different, no. There's two different ways in which this no is being put on the table here. On the one hand, the no of the opposite of the no of the yes versus no, of the black versus white, of the thesis antithesis, that is a no that forms what's called a zero-sum game. Zero-sum game. This is very well known in the world. It's called zero-sum, written like that. That's your sum. Zero sum, and it basically means all that there is plus all that there's not makes zero, makes the whole thing. So, you know, so a lot of people, when they think of binaries, are thinking of no, yes, add together, get the whole story. That's so not the whole story. That's not even part of the story, as we've now just seen. That's like a minuscule aspect of the story, because no versus yes don't even exist like that, unless you've sublated one to the other and so on and so forth. So when one talks about the no, and they mean by it contradiction, and the word contradiction literally means an annihilation of the other. If you contradict something, then you contradict it to its fullest point. That's what the difference is. So antithesis, there we are. Antithesis is the contradiction of thesis. Where there is antithesis, there cannot be thesis. Where there's thesis, there cannot be antithesis. They're on two different sides, except they're on the same side, as it were. They're on the same plane, and that's a contradiction. So if in fact the thesis and the antithesis were on the same side, that would be a contradiction. You say that's a contradiction. An antagonism is that which presents a no, but it doesn't annihilate the other. Okay? Now, that's a different form, and there's a lot of social theorists in particular, like Mouffe and Laclau, who talk about antagonisms. Hegemony and Socialist Strategies, famous book of theirs, chapter 4. But what Foucault is saying, in fact, he says it in The Father's No, in I think it's in Method, or one of his volume 1 or 2 or 3.
2, I think.
Yeah, is it where The Father's No is in that one?
Yeah.
Okay, and in The Father's No, not to insult fathers here, but in The Father's No, what it's about is taking the logos as the position. Why is the logos bad? It's not because it's necessarily phallocentric. It's because the logos is what we're talking about here. The logos as the system that creates this universal. It's the logical compilation, as it were, of the synthesis. So that logos is that form of the no that he's arguing against. But the no that creates distance, the no that does this, that is able to create the antagonism, or something else not named, this is what Foucault's talking about as, let's say, the positive version of the no. And in fact, there are these debates that happened in the 70s called the power debates by Stephen Lukes and somebody else, Bachrach, but not Bert Bachrach, Peter Bachrach, I think. And it's very interesting, actually, because they basically say there's 4 types of no in this book. And they wrote it in the 70s when there was a big fight about student movements, civil rights movement, and the question was how to say no to the system. And the answer tended to be lie in the street. So when the police come to move you off, you're just in this sort of dead position. And it's very hard to move. So that's one form of saying no, just say no, that kind of thing. The other no is the no where you end up doing opposite. So that's a different no. The opposite of what is demanded of you. It's another form of no.
Putting flour in the barrels of the
Putting a
guns.
flower in the barrel of the gun, another form of the no. Okay, and then of silence is another form of the no. Okay, so there's all different forms. But what's important about raising it, and I'm glad you raised it like this, is that it allows us to begin to look at what he's talking about with thickness and thin in relationship to what becomes much more difficult ways of putting it, not because one's trying to be very clever and smart at dinner parties, but because the difficultness of saying the no saying when you start talking about it in terms of curved time, or this kind of like, like, what? This kind of thing, is to clarify it, actually, that there's different forms of no that don't bring in just emptiness, or that the notion of emptiness doesn't exist. And that's so to have a singularity, which is I guess the most active form of this form of no, where there is nothing opposite to it. That's very weird. You can't conceive of a singularity until you get out of dialect. You can talk about it as an abstraction, but a singularity, by its very definition in a dialectical form, doesn't have an anti-singularity side, because it's not bringing together something. So it's just a problem. Were you going to read something there in that?
I was just thinking about, you were talking about no, I was reading this book by Alexander Gore, that's how I pronounce his name, Finding the Keys, a musician,
Oh, great.
composer, and he talks in here about what differentiates the modern, what is it about the modern, and he makes an argument here, it's what they leave out in many respects. So he talks about the difference, what Ravel seems, to introduce interesting ideas, but he wouldn't consider it really modern in the sense that Schoenberg was, because the things that he doesn't leave out, I was thinking of that as another version of the no.
Yes.
Yeah. So that's,
And in
that's
fact,
what
I'm glad you brought that up, because in fact, one often goes to acoustics as a way of rethinking representation, because acoustics, by definition, doesn't represent. You know, you might say, well, this sound makes me feel that it's sad or makes me feel happy, but it's not representing happiness. This is one of the reasons that there was a fight against music itself as being seen as a form of art, because it wasn't capable of representing. But that's neither here nor there. But the point is that this, you're right, you're so right about pointing that out, that the way in which music, sound, noise constructs itself and is able to present a meaning of some kind, even if the meaning is just that it's there, that's the meaning, does it in a way by which silence, dropout, something is happening, so the pattern that's created is not created because of all the noises that are there, it's created because of all the knots that are there, all the not noises that are there. That made sense. Did that make sense? No, it didn't really make sense. That's right. But I think it's pretty good, because did you have a chance to read the discourse figure?
I've only read the introduction and I read the Goldberg first, and then I read the introduction to it.
I mean, but probably no one other than you guys have read Hegel, not recently anyway. So I think you're doing pretty well, considering this is your first toe drip into the thing. Okay, yeah, Dane.
I look at that diagram, and first thing that comes to mind is fractals.
Yes.
Mandelbrot fractal.
Of course.
Infinitely complex. And am I on the sort of right?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
Yes. Yes. In fact, I mean, there's a number of people who have been working on this. On one of them, and there's a piece on academia.edu which you can read if you feel like it, called Fractal Philosophy, which I've done. But yeah, that's what this is leading to on this level. But it's not just. I mean, some people call it. Some people don't call it philosophy, actually. But I mean, we're going to get a guy coming in hopefully next semester, but if not in September, named Mika Ilo, sorry. He's from Finland, and he works on haptics and the question of how representation in fractals creates different forms of paint in painting, what he means by this. He's phenomenal. I really hope he can come. We're just trying to get funding sorted out, and we don't have any funding here, so we're trying to get his funding to get sorted out. But, okay. Do you have a question?
I was thinking that it's like, well, I suppose it's like really bringing to fore the politicality, which is that bit where he refers to the poem, like the writer who uses sort of song or uses a different kind of rhythm. He refers to because these kind of notes, like, well, I suppose in terms of, because another way of putting it was, if signification and as a sort of pathway or understanding doesn't necessarily work, then a sort of a different kind of politicality does work, and so this is what this book is sort of setting out, a different kind of politicality.
Yes, a totally different social agency. Agency, politicality, sociality is at stake. Are you slipping away quietly?
No.
Yeah.
I'm gonna have a snack. If that's all right.
Oh yeah, that's okay.
You should.
You know, I once went to a meeting last week and with one of those Velcro bags. And this was a meeting that was packed, like 200 people, and sadly I was late, so that was the next problematic thing. And I opened the bag, I was like, everybody like, sorry. And then, then I had to get something else, and I gave up this bag. Okay, let's turn to, what page are you on there? I want to see if we can finally get to open this book. Unless there are other questions. Did you have another question? Hey, Gianpaolo, do you have a question?
No, I think
Not that you
go
have
ahead.
one.
Yeah.
Mira? No, Mark? No? Cool. Not even asking Lisa. I'm not even asking Lisa. Okay.
I'd like to speak about music and orientation, but not today.
And sexual orientation?
No.
No.
No, disorientation.
Disorientation.
With music and like these I'm not going to.
No, go ahead before we open this book.
When the experiments that I mentioned that Merleau-Ponty and Kant do is about this kind of, wearing strange glasses or being blindfolded, and how you learn to dwell in a place, how you kind of, learn to find out, you orientate yourself to it according to the verticals and the horizontals. But what Merleau-Ponty says, just in a footnote, I think, is that it doesn't work for sound. You can't do an experiment and change the points of sound that people, the feedback they get into them. They can't orientate themselves in that change, so you can't learn to dwell in space. And I was wondering what the difference between the senses are in terms of that ability to orientate themselves, in terms of my PhD really and my art practice, because I use sound.
In fact, in terms of your last chapter, let's all write it together.
Yeah.
No, I understand that.
Notes.
Yeah. No, go ahead.
So that's
Well,
it really.
let me ask you this. I mean, just in the question of disorientation, why is it being called disorientation?
Because of the relation between bodies and spaces, I suppose.
The reason I'm asking is not just to be prickly. It's because it seems to me that if you're inhabiting or you're dwelling in a soundscape without either A, really knowing anything about music, or B, being blindfolded, or whatever the story is, why would that necessarily be disorienting? It would be differently orienting.
Well, it's the where I'm at is an uncertain reorientation. At the
Okay.
moment. So yeah, perhaps it's not the disorientation.
I say that because I think that by focusing on the I could be wrong, I haven't read your thesis, so I don't want to throw you on a wrong track. You haven't read it, very good, excellent. Okay, said like a true PhD student, excellent. It's almost done, this is exactly the right view. When one has to be careful about
From
where the concepts are stolen.
Yeah, it's
So if it's-
it's a kind of phenomenology.
No, I don't mean that. I mean that, or redeployed. You can put it slightly different. So, orientation versus disorientation obviously then sort of implies that those are the two choices. All right, that there isn't like a third, fourth, or 20th choice on the relationship of orientation to things. The relation, because it seems to me what orientation is about is grounding. That's what one is oriented because one's going in a certain direction, or one is at least capable of knowing that there is a direction. Okay, so the disorientation is the non-directional ground, but you see, maybe you mean that it's just non-directional, no ground, or maybe you mean that there's a ground, but it's just not within a direction.
Well, Ahmed argues that disorientation is about becoming the object.
Yes, of course. And therefore there is a ground. So it implies that there's some form of cohesive environment that allows for materiality to take shape. So that's why I just be cautious about that. Not to, again, invoke the totality of the universal, unless you know that that's what you want to do. Yeah? Now we can go to this.
Anybody like a piece before I eat it?
That's right. What is it?
It's just sponge cake. It's a piece of homemade sponge cake.
Oh, did you make it?
No, I didn't.
Okay. Are we going to footnote the person who did make it?
It's Katie.
Katie made it.
Yeah. Would you like a piece?
No, I can't eat it because I'm gluten intolerant.
Oh, okay.
Otherwise I would, trust me. Okay, so thank you to Katie. Right, okay. What page were you on when you were looking at the political aspect here?
Oh, it wasn't on a particular page for that.
Okay, what page are you on now?
I was just going back to that. I suppose what I was thinking about was that he said it in this bit where
What
page
page are you
42. It's what we looked at a bit last week,
Oh,
really,
yeah.
that bit where it's really on the Hegel bit. But I thought he was sort of making this
Can you look on,
distinction.
Lisa? You look on Samira, so you look on,
Yes.
and I can steal your book. Okay, okay, go on.
Well, I suppose I was just trying to kind of. I mean, he's making. I forgotten sort of what to do with the move he's making with Hegel, which is well against Hegel really here. Since I last read it, so I did have it. I did have something which I've now forgotten what it was, but it's to do. It's to do with like well, well, no, I can't say it, but I need to sort of reread these sections again, even though we read them last week. Just a much slower reading because I sort of.
Well, let's just look at the very last. I mean, I think this is kind of interesting here. If one looks at this thing where it says, now the symbol is a prima facie a sign, is prima facie a sign. So what he's getting here, he's talking about how something gets to be knowable, the sensible, the sensible thing, how things become itself. This is where he's going. If you scroll down, the sentence says, therefore, when symbol is taken into this sense, as a mere sign, such as indifference between meaning and its expression, we may not take account of its reference to art. So what he's getting up, is this what you're pointing to, this particular difficulty here? Do you see it?
No, the second part
yeah,
at the bottom, is
yeah.
that right? Yeah.
I suppose it's more. I was trying to get clear the different moves he's making, like the structural linguistics and the phenomenology and the Hegel one, because it's like three projections, and then he sort of sets out his, and he sort of there's like and how it relates to designation, or how injection does or doesn't relate to designation aspect, because in the figure of the designation, but he says there's a table of there's three things, signifier something, probably represent now some designation, and then he sets out that the image, the figure image, the form of matrix, but the sort of point on which they turn on something was the designation aspect. So in terms of sort of moving from these sort of moves and see how it goes.
Yeah.
So
Okay.
this was the page in which I thought he was really sort of doing the thing with Hegel, but I've forgotten why.
Okay, let's okay. So this is that's okay. We're going to skip that a little bit because I think that I would really like us to get to the chapter on. No, this is not. Hold on. Oh, the effect of thickness in the system, page 90, and also thickness on the margins of discourse. So what I've been trying to outline up to now is this bit here. You're right to have pointed out the earlier work. So pages 90 through to 156. So the difference between opposition and difference, and how difference actually becomes the environment for the no, except it's not meant as a no. It's not meant as an in-between. It's completely different. Like, that's why a surface, at the end of the day, can be a no, because it doesn't belong in an object and it doesn't belong outside of an object. It's something else. But if you understand a surface as having to be attached to an object, then that's a no whole, then you're still dealing with a dialectical move. Whereas, for example, the universe, one could say, is a surface, the entire universe. So that there is no structure, that the universe is attached to or not attached to. You don't get out of the universe in that sense, because there's no surface that, there's only a surface. There's no form attached to it. Now that's so then it means, are we just, is this just, again, ivory tower sport? We're just end up saying, okay, well, that's all very interesting, but at the end of the day, then what is the planet, within the solar system? Is that like a nodal point, on the surface? So we'll get back to this, but it's something to think about, how something can just be a surface and be nothing, it's not attached to anything. But he's leading up to this. That's where the other space comes in, which we haven't gotten to yet. So the question becomes the effect of thickness in the system. So in the chapter on page 90, where he gets to the question of the system is that which organizes something so that you can have moment two. Moment one is, let's say, the plane, the surface. But moment two is the repetition of that, is a reproduction of that, is there something that you can say, this has happened, And given blah, 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 that's going to happen. So it's moment 2. Moment 1 to moment 2, the prediction of something. So that's a system.
That's making a discontinuity instead of a continuity.
It doesn't matter. I mean,
Oh,
I'm just saying that is.
the key thing. There's a key thing going on between like dialectics being about like there's this thing. The static dialectics is where thinking and thought are they're confused. A network of discontinuities. So it's like so I was thinking, oh yeah, this discontinuities goes with the dialectics as opposed to the continuities. That's like no gap with the quantum.
No, it would be the other way around.
Oh, right.
the discontinuities are with the quantum, and the continuities are with the dialectic.
Okay. Right.
Why? Because just even though there's this sort of spiraling sublation and so on, it's still, and you can look at the abstract components. They are abstract and discrete in their abstractness, but that doesn't mean they're discontinuous. They're in fact profoundly continuous. You can't, like I was saying, you can't take that ring outside of the tree. It is continuous within this environment. So it doesn't matter if linear means this way, or this way, or this way. It's all linear in the sense, or it's all analogical in the sense, the logic of the ana, where it's just literally in a straight line, as it were, or it doesn't have to be straight, it has to be connected. So movement is considered connected in a dialectical sense. That's why you can think in terms of certainty, but in an
so he's
uncertain.
making a distinction between a static dialectics then and a non-static dialectics perhaps.
No, he's making, no. Two things are going on here. First thing is that the word system is the only thing I wanted you to get a sense of here. The word system, the concept system, is that which means that things can produce a pattern, and that pattern holds together in a certain set of time, space, dimension, something. That's a system. A system is that which you can then predict something from this thing. If it's not a system, you can't do any prediction. So atonal music is not a system. It's not systematic music, for example. You can't predict the pattern. If you can predict the pattern, then it's some other form of music that might have very different, seemingly atonal environments. Now, just because it is not a system doesn't mean it doesn't create matter, make sense happen. But I'm just saying, he's talking about here this question of how that which is a system, which is to say something that gives a prediction. So anything that can give a prediction is going to be a system.
Yeah.
Whether it's rhizomatic, whether it's dialectical, whether it's teleological, whether it's harmonious, if it can predict, it's going to be a system.
But that was a quote. So I was just wondering what you said.
Yeah, but the second part, for what you're talking about there, is not this part. What you were... Oh, I hope we don't have a fire alarm. No, it's the library. It's the library. It's all right. What you were asking about there is that the way in which one can understand discontinuity or continuity figuring something that creates matter, or figuring is, I'm taking as what I'm trying to say, something that ends up producing a whole, a cohesiveness.
So I was thinking about the separation in relation to sort of dialectics, and this involves this separation of object-subject.
No, but the separation is only, it's an abstract separation. So it's not separation in the fully separated sense. Means I'm not sure. That's okay. Mark, do you want to give it a go?
No, I'm thinking I have a train to catch at some point.
Okay. Okay, don't think that again. Does anyone want to give it a go? And then I didn't know it was 12 o'clock. Just to say that, just to have a sense of what it is to have a distinction, that doesn't mean it's not connected. If something's distinct, doesn't mean that it's it's the deep cut. It's it doesn't mean that it's, I mean, the deep cut meaning it's completely apart. Because even thesis and antithesis, they still have to be stuck together in order for them to make sense. Okay, this is obviously much more complicated. Sorry about this. I think maybe, I didn't realize it was 4 o'clock. I thought it was later. I mean, earlier. Shall we attempt to do the thickness next week? But really do thickness so that we can see thickness, thinness, system, really take a look at that. And if possible, get to the other space. Desire. Line in the letter. I don't know if we can do that. That might be just way too much.
So, are we talking about chapters here?
I'm talking
To
about,
literally
yeah,
do-
just try and read through thickness on the margins of discourse, the known, the position of the object, and opposition
Yeah.
and difference.
Okay.
Read as much as you can.
Yeah, yeah.
Or read parts of what you can. And we'll give it another go at this. Does that sound
Yeah.
fair?
Yeah.
Okay. And then also, if you are interested in Hegel, phenomenology, I would read the preface, to start with the preface. Numbers 1 to probably 38 at least. I mean, so, in fact, there's stuff on Hegel in here.
Or you could catch me early before class next week and feed me coffee, and I will bore you to death on Hegel.
And he
I will
is-
not stop talking about Hegel. You will say that he's ranting about Hegel.
And he's very good on Hegel.
And yeah, so it's happening.
That's true.
Can you use smaller syllable words to do that?
For a small
That's
T.
2 coffees.
Yes.
2 coffees, yeah, thank you.
No, yeah, they do. Yeah, he's doing the job. It's like a puzzle. He's like a wonderful puzzle and these little bits. I don't do puzzles, but I do like.
Well, I can tell you, if you need to learn Hegel, he's your man. Here you go.
Oh, slides. I like slides. That phenomenology needs the other two subjects don't shine
Wow,
through
how did that
too
ring?
much.
How is that possible? It's ringing. I got off the hook. Wow. Very impressed. Gosh. Hello.
I'm assuming it's that.
I'd like to know what he was talking about.
Yes.
The direct.
Collaged it onto something else.
Mark, do you have your student card?
I'll have
Yeah.
I don't have a student card.
I don't mean a student card, the rail card. Okay. So we're still working on the possibility of having a, you need to catch that.
I need to.
You need your book. Oh, you're not getting that.